I can think of no better person to open our 2011 seminar than our first speaker this morning, Mr. Greg Van Wingard. I went on Amazon yesterday to see how many of his books were for sale, and the number I came up with was 6, but I've been told that that's maybe a third to a half of what he's actually had his name put on in his career.
13.
Sorry?
13.
13. Who's counting? I don't know, but I'm working on it. He's here to speak to us this morning on Yasta 18 of the Staffel with the split personality. Is that like the gang that couldn't shoot straight?
Definitely.
Ladies and gentlemen, Greg Van Wingard.
Thanks for that nice introduction, JR, except my name is pronounced Van Weingard. Never get JR to do that. You don't. Before I begin, I could never have written this book or this presentation without the help of many people, many of whom are right in this room, and others who have now passed on. My good Dutch friend, Harry Van Dorsen, passed away a number of years ago, interviewed Jasta 18 veteran Paul Schreiber, translated and transcribed his war diary, which is absolutely indispensable. And of course, historian Ed Furco literally wrote the first book of Jasta 18. And of course, there are my dear friends, Alex Emery and Dan San Abbott, both of whom passed away within a few weeks of each other, not so long ago. And I'd like to also thank the late Rick Diamond and such people in this room as Adam Waite, Jim Miller. And this speech is dedicated to them in its own pitiful way. Royal Prussian Jagdstaffel 18 was a German fighter squadron of World War I. It never contained any of the household names like Staffel or Goering, but it did have a very distinguished history and boasted a stellar cast of characters. And it also had something of a split personality, as I tried to indicate in this slide. Something unheard of happened with the entire roster of Jasta 18, commanded by Rudolf Berthold, right there. In March of 1918, they literally switched identities with Jasta 15, seen over here. And Jasta 18 suddenly became Jasta 15, and vice versa. Furthermore, this unit flew some of the most colorful aircraft of any squadron in the war, which of course is what attracted me to them. The one thing both incarnations of the unit shared in their squadron livery was bright red noses. Well, Jasta 18 was officially formed on 30th of October 1916, though it would not be fully operational for another 2 months. The men of the unit began assembling at FEA 12, and the unit was fortunate in its very first commander, Karl Heino Griefenhagen, who was by some accounts a pre-war pilot. Like all German fighter pilots, his first experience was in a variety of two-seater units. And his first fighter unit was a formation that became the nucleus for the very first Jasta, Jasta 1, in August of 1916. And there he learned from such great Eindecker aces as Kurt Winkens and Gustav Leffers. Jasta 18 would be based at Halloween, Airfield, and please forgive my mangling French and Flemish names today, with Walter in the front row correcting them. But anyway, if this photo of Griefenhagen looks a bit familiar, it's actually a detail of this book. And this is Griefenhagen with somebody else, I'm not sure who this is. Of course, this is Commander von Richthofen after his head wound of July 1917. This photo was first published in Mama Richthofen's book in the 1930s, where Griefenhagen was mistakenly identified as Wilhelm Reinhardt. But it's really Griefenhagen. And although he would only score 2 victories, he must have been one of those quietly inspiring fighter leaders who commanded respect and could inspire others to do great things. Well, this is the airfield at Halluin in Flanders, in the 4th Army. They had these huge hangars, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and a watchtower right there. And most German fighter pilots really wanted to be stationed in Flanders opposite the Royal Flying Corps. That's where the action was. And that's where they would get the best chance of winning victories and glory. As Paul Strela, Jasta 18 pilot himself said, something's happening there all the time. Air fighting was sport there. And Halloween is right there, not far. And I'll let Walter pronounce these, give the correct Belgian pronunciation.
Markebeke
And
in Harelbeke.
And after, those are the 3 aerodromes they were at in 1917, not far from where it is. Across the lines, a number of their opponents, 56 Squadron was right there, and number 20 Squadron was in that area, not very far away. Well, Paul Strela was the first officer pilot to arrive at Yasta 18. After service in the trenches, he finally managed to become a flyer with an artillery spotting unit, and then was transferred to fighters. He would go on to great things. He would end the war with 14 victories and survived until 1985. And his memoirs, his flight log, his photos are just indispensable to telling this story. Well, at the beginning of 1917, Yasta 18 received its first aircraft, a full complement of the sleek Albatros D3s, the latest and most highly desired of all the German fighters of the day. And this particular one, right there, had a dark stripe and a dark wheel covers as personal markings, and this was flown by Walter von Bülow, one of the most accomplished of the early pilots of Yasta 18. And speaking of von Bülow, here he is, the pilot of that D3. Walter von Bülow, Wolfgang, was the eldest of 3 famous flying brothers. And of the 3, only his brother Harry, also an ace, would survive the war. And Harry would go on to fly fighters again in the Luftwaffe in World War II. But Walter had seen service as an Eindecker pilot in the early days. He had a wealth of experience, and he had the exotic experience of scoring 2 victories in Palestine with Fliegerabteilung 300. And after he left Yasta 18, he would go on to Yasta 36, and he would die as commander of the elite Yasta Volta in January of 1918. Well, Yasta 18 was opposed by several British squadrons that they met repeatedly over and over in 1917. And one, as you can see here, was 20 Squadron with its FE-2Ds. 20 Squadron would score more victories than any other British unit. They also held the record for the most casualties of any British unit. And after flying the pushers, the FE-2Ds, they went on to fly Bristol fighters. And Colin, Owers, and Russell can tell us all about what it feels like to fly in an FE-2D. Quite an experience having 2 of those people right in this room. Anyway, they also encountered number 1 Squadron Newports, and they took a heavy toll of number 45 Squadron Southwest Strutters. Well, Bloody April. Yasta 14 already had 14 victories when Bloody April began, and it would be a mixed month for them. They shot down 7 more RFC aircraft, but they would lose 1 pilot killed and another 1 prisoner of war. Worst of all, on the 24th, Griefenhagen, who was seen here about 2 weeks after this, was wounded in the jaw and lower leg. And this shows him about 3 weeks after that, on his return. You can see his jaw bandage and the cane. He's talking to Walter von Bülow, who commanded the unit in his absence. Well, out of the wealth of victories, I just had to pick a few to recite in detail. On the 7th of May, Walter von Bülow achieved a rather singular victory, and it was an FE-2D of number 20 Squadron. Most German pilots dreamed of forcing down a British aircraft behind their own lines intact. Not only did Walter von Bülow do that, he brought it down on his own airfield. And one can just imagine the awestruck Yasta personnel standing there, watching this big pusher gently come gliding down with a dead engine and a full bomb load, by the way, to land right on their doorstep. I'm reminded of that great scene in the Blue Max where Staffel is shepherding down the REA on his own field. Well, this is the FE-2D on the airfield right there. You can see the crowd it attracted. The very first German to run up to the airplane was Paul Strehlen. And the Germans had already experienced times when British aircraft landed intact behind their lines, but the crew managed to set them on fire before they could do anything. So Strehlen was prepared. He ran up rather nervously with a loaded pistol and fired a shot in the air. And he watched rather nervously as the British pilot clambered down from the nacelle. And Strehlen, pistol in hand, was ready when the British pilot reached into his flight jacket and pulled out his visiting card and handed Strehlen. And this is the crew right there with their victory bolted from you on the middle. You can see there are none too sad to be alive. Well, Strehlen forced this Newport down intact behind the German lines. It was the second of 3 Newports from No. 1 Squadron he would bring down behind his own lines. And sadly, the pilot J.R. Anthony landed the plane nicely, but later died of his wounds. And it was quite a trophy nonetheless, and the rudder mysteriously disappeared before the authorities could take the Newport away. Well, there it is. Strehlen managed to take it, and it was a prized souvenir in his home for many years. This photo was taken in 1976 by Peter Kilda, who was visiting Strehlen. Well, early in July of 1917, the Yasta was transferred to Harleby, forgive me, after spending a brief time at Markevika. The little brick chapel right there, the little chapel, bright red brick, must have been a nice landmark for the pilots as they returned. They could always stop to squat the landing field with the trees behind it. And how do I know that was a little red brick chapel? It's still there.
Whoa.
And I would like to thank Eddie Lambrick